Welcome to episode 6 of the SaaS Report. I'm your host, Matt Aird, the founder and CEO at Sales Science. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Q2 numbers for Palo Alto Networks, Okta, ServiceNow, and Veeva Systems. We're also going to be taking a closer look at another 3 metrics from our Q2 SaaS metrics report. If you haven't seen a copy of that yet, you can get access to that now. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. In that report, basically what we do is a deep dive on about 30 odd public SaaS companies, and we have a look at all of their core SaaS metrics. So things like ARR growth rates, net revenue retention, CAC payback, magic number, right? Anything you could possibly want to know about these public SaaS companies, you can get it in that report. We're also going to be covering the rise of the AI SDR, these AI agents that are created to run outbound campaigns for companies, right, to generate sales opportunities. We're going to be looking at the implications of that, some of the challenges that those platforms might face, and whether or not we think this is going to be good for go-to-market efficiency long term. So let's get into it. So we got Q2 numbers from Palo Alto Networks. So Palo Alto Networks is a security vendor, one of the more established players in the space, so they compete with companies like SentinelOne and CrowdStrike. Palo Alto Networks added $328 million in net new ARR in Q2, spending $742 million on sales and marketing in order to generate that growth. That gave them a magic number of 0.46 and CAC payback of 35.6 months. So go-to-market efficiency for them is down year over year, about 10% compared to Q2 of 2023. But those metrics are still pretty healthy for a company at their scale, right? They're at $4.5 billion in ARR. They grew that almost 23% with, fairly middle of the road go-to-market efficiency, which isn't bad. Rule of X was down 19% year over year. They had $238 million in operating income for the quarter, or about an 11% operating margin. That's down slightly from 13% in Q2 of last year. Reason this is down is due to an almost 10% increase in G&A spending as a percentage of revenue, and then a 7% increase in R&D as well, but a pretty healthy bottom line for them. So they had net income of $358 million for the quarter, or about a 16% net profit margin. So pull all that together, they're trading at 23 times ARR right now, which is pretty high. Only Palantir trades at a higher ARR multiple. They're at 30 times ARR right now. ServiceNow, I can't believe we haven't covered them yet. So ServiceNow, one of the other OG kind of SaaS companies that we track, you could think of them, Workday and Salesforce as kind of the stalwarts in the category. ServiceNow added $1.87 billion in net new ARR year over year. So from Q2 last year to Q2 this year, almost $1.9 billion. Breaking that down, that's more than $155 million in net new ARR per month. Hard to wrap your head around those numbers. So they spent $3.5 billion on sales and marketing in order to do that over the last 12 months. That gives them a magic number of 0.53 and CAC payback of just under 29 months, which when you're at 10 billion in ARR is pretty insane to still have that level of sales efficiency. Gives them an ARR growth rate of 22.5% year over year. So what we normally see with these larger companies is that go-to-market efficiency decreases over time, right? As you think about it, as ARR, your ARR base increases, you've sold to most of the customers that are most likely to buy from you, right? So each incremental customer or each incremental piece of revenue is that much harder to generate. So typically we see go-to-market efficiency decrease. That really hasn't been the case for ServiceNow. They've been able to really maintain solid go-to-market efficiency as they've continued to scale. And we can even see that when we compare them with companies like HubSpot or Smartsheet. So these companies are about a fifth the size in terms of run rates, and ServiceNow has better go-to-market efficiency metrics than either HubSpot or Smartsheet right now. When we look a little bit closer under the microscope and take a look at Q2 in isolation, so all the numbers that I've mentioned so far were kind of year over year numbers. If we look at Q2 in isolation, things weren't as good, right? So they only added $76 million in net new ARR in Q2. That gave them a 0.1 magic number and 146-month CAC payback for that 90-day period. Now, historically, Q2 is a bit of a slow quarter for them, so we do expect those metrics to improve in Q3. They did generate a ton of operating income, so $240 million in operating income for the quarter, up from $117 million in Q2 of last year. Free cash flow margins of 13% and a rule of X of 58. So yeah, slower quarter, really good year-over-year numbers. They're trading at 17.5 times ARR right now. Okta reported Q2 numbers as well. So they're a company that plays in kind of the identity verification / security space. They've done a really good job over the last 12 months of cutting operating expenses and getting much closer to break even. So they went from a loss of $162 million in Q2 of last year to just 19 million in Q2 of this year. They've done this by making significant cuts to OPEX. So they went from spending about 102% of revenue on OPEX to just 79% in Q2 of this year. They got there through about an 18% reduction in R&D spending and a 22% reduction in both sales and marketing and G&A. Off the back of that, ARR per employee increased 14% to 425K, which is well above the median of about 387 of the basket of companies that we track. And at the same time, so you've got kind of reducing OPEX, trimming the fat, they still managed to grow ARR by 16% year over year. So pretty remarkable turnaround in such a short period of time. Go-to-market efficiency is down slightly, however, so magic numbers down to 0.49 from 0.61. CAC payback is up to 32 months from 28 months last year. Also saw a decrease in NRR, but that's not unique. Almost every company that we track has had some level of reduction here, so that's down to 110% from 115% 12 months ago. Now, all of this rolls up into just a 5 times ARR multiple for Okta, which based on their current metrics, I think is low, right? I don't give people advice around investment decisions, but yeah, looking at that seems cheap, right? That seems cheap based on the efficiency gains that they've seen. Pretty decent still go-to-market efficiency, growing at an okay rate, like 5 times ARR seems light to me. Veeva Systems also reported Q2 numbers. So Veeva Systems, think of them as the Salesforce for life sciences, right? They offer a kind of CRM product for life sciences and biotech companies. Interestingly, the platform's actually built right on top of Salesforce. So the founder was an early employee at Salesforce, identified an opportunity to go, hey, we're going to go and build CRM for life sciences and biotech, and actually just did that on the Salesforce platform. So all of their customers still running on the Salesforce platform. They've got plans apparently to move off that onto their own platform for margin and operational improvements by 2025. But as of today, Veeva is a business built entirely on the Salesforce platform. So Veeva is a company that I've followed for a long time now, and they are extremely efficient when it comes to go-to-market, right? So in the last 12 months, they've grown ARR by 19%. So they added $363 million in net new ARR. And get this, they've only spent $390 million on sales and marketing to get there. Right? That's insane. If we compare them to a company like HubSpot, HubSpot's at a similar run rate. So they're both around $2-ish billion in ARR. So in the last 12 months, HubSpot's added $420 million in ARR, right? Or about 17% more than Veeva did. But they spent almost 3 times as much on sales and marketing in order to do it, right? So almost a total of 1.1 billion. So that's insane, right? So Veeva's able to generate almost the same ARR growth with 3 times less to spend. That efficiency is incredible. Because of this, they've got really strong operating margins, so 25% operating margins, so $171 million in operating income for Q2, $101 million in free cash flow, and for the quarter they had CAC payback of just 15 months, magic number of 1.06, and a rule of 40 of 35. They're trading at 15 times ARR right now. Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Q2 SaaS Metrics Report is now live. Go and get your copy now if you haven't got it. So I want to take a closer look at 3 other metrics from that report today. The first one that we're going to look at is operating margin. So operating margin is basically the income that a company generates before taking into account any of the kind of financial income or expenditure, right? So it's like you take your revenue, you subtract your cost of goods sold, you subtract your G&A, your sales and marketing, and your R&D expense, and then that gives you your operating income. So it doesn't include things like interest income received or interest expense or anything like that, right? We're just talking about the kind of the core operations of the business and how much income do those generate for us. Now, when we look at this chart, we can see that there's quite a wide disparity between those at the top. So companies like Veeva and Salesforce at 25 and 19% respectively. And then companies at the other end, like Rubrik at a minus 82% operating margin, Confluent minus 46, Asana at minus 43. You've got a really wide distribution of results here. Now, typically what you'll see here is that when a company is trying to grow aggressively or gain market share, operating margins will be lower, right? Because they're prepared to spend more money than they're bringing in to improve the product, to attract new customers, to retain and expand those customers. As these companies become more mature, so companies like Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, you tend to see these operating margins increase. But we've also seen changes over the past couple of quarters come about from macroeconomic conditions, right? So over the past 24 months, there's been a big push from investors to say to these companies, hey, we need you to get closer to break even, right? Growth rates aren't going to be the same. We're not going to be able to grow ARR as quickly as we have. So what we want to do is see some more efficiency in the business. And so there's been this push, and as we've reported on this almost every week, there's been this push from companies to kind of cut their operating losses, move towards break even, or even profitability so that they can create a more sustainable business, right? And be prepared for kind of like the next wave of expansion or growth. And what we can see when we look at the medians here is that these companies have done a good job of transitioning in that regard, right? So in Q2 of 2022, the median operating income margin was negative 26%. Right, fast forward 24 months, we're now at negative 5%. So we've seen improvements there of almost 60% year on year for the last 2 years. So to call out some individual companies here, if we take a look at the chart, we can see Okta. Okta's been a big mover. So they were at negative 29% in Q2 of last year, down to just negative 3% this year. SentinelOne was a big mover as well. They went from negative 63% to negative 40%, so still a bit of work to do for them, but a big jump in the right direction. Klaviyo has headed in the other direction, so they were at 4% operating margins in Q2 of last year. They're now down to negative 6%. And Rubrik also swung hard in the wrong direction, so they've gone from negative 49% to, as we called out earlier, negative 82% in Q2 of this year. What I think we'll continue to see over Q3 and Q4 of this year is much of the same, right? I think these companies will continue to try to drive operating incomes up because growth rates are likely to remain lower. And so we'll see companies looking to build a more sustainable engine so that when that next phase of growth is available, they're in a good position to take advantage of that. Another core SaaS metric that helps us to understand the health of a SaaS business is this metric called NRR, or net revenue retention. Basically, NRR helps us to understand how much of the revenue that you generated in a previous period did you generate in this period, right? So it's of the customers that we had previously. Let's say our total customer base was spending $100 million with us. In this quarter, how much of that total spend from that customer base did we either retain, expand, or contract on? So let's say that our customers spend $100 million with us. Those same customers spent $110 million with us this year. We'd have net revenue retention of 110%, right? If we've got negative net revenue retention, then that means that those customers in aggregate are spending less with us this year than they did last. So we don't want to be in that situation, right? One of the beautiful things about SaaS is that when it's working well, most companies have positive net revenue retention. And that means basically that they get growth from their existing customer base every single year, which means that it's just that much easier to grow that top line revenue number. Now, disappointingly, these companies aren't required to report on net revenue retention. And so we only get 19 of the 30 odd that we track reporting on this metric. What we can see when we look at this chart is that most companies are above the 100% mark, right? So we've only got DocuSign and ZoomInfo that come under that mark. You've got Box and Twilio, which are kind of teetering on the edge there at 102, but everyone else is in a fairly healthy position. Snowflake leads the way at 127, GitLab pretty close behind at 126, Rubrik at 120, and Zscaler there at 115%. When we look at the medians though, across the last 24 months, we can see that these rates have decreased pretty substantially. So in Q2 of 22, the median net revenue retention rate across the same companies was 125. Right, that's down to 112 in Q2 of this year. If we look at individual examples on this chart, we can see that there's been some big movements, right, in the company. So Rubrik was at 146 in Q2 of last year. They're now at 120. Right, Snowflake was at 142. They're now at 127. Zscaler was at 121. They're now at 115. Right, so we can see that the trend is downwards. Now the reason for that, obviously, is that we're just in a much tougher economic environment. Companies are a lot more cognizant of where the money is being spent. You've seen big reduction in forces across a lot of these companies. And so when most companies are pricing on a per seat or headcount basis, you're going to see contract sizes decrease, right? So all of this has meant that like the contracts that they had previously just aren't expanding at the same rate that they did before. They're still expanding, right? But we're just not seeing the growth as aggressively as we had in previous periods. Again, that's likely to continue for the rest of 2024. As interest rates continue to drop and the macroeconomic environment improves, we may see some increases here, but until then, we're likely to see NRR rates continue to trend lower over the next couple of quarters. All right, finally, for this Q2 metrics report, I want to take a look at the rule of X. So the rule of X is a new metric that we introduced a couple of weeks ago. Very similar to the rule of 40, it looks to assess how companies are balancing the need for both growth and free cash flow generation. And what we can see with the rule of X is that it's been impacted a lot more than the rule of 40. Because the rule of X is more heavily skewed by growth rates, right? We've seen this number decrease more than we have rule of 40. So when we look at the chart, we can see that Atlassian leads the way here. They're at 100. CrowdStrike, Monday, and Klaviyo all around the 90 mark. If you remember back to episode 4 where we introduced this metric, we know that a good number for rule of X is 40, a better metric here is 50, and then best is kind of 70 plus, right? So we've got a lot of companies over that 70 plus mark. Got Cloudflare, Palantir, Datadog, Zscaler, Rubrik, CyberArk, Klaviyo, Monday, right? All of these guys are in this kind of best category here. So they're growing well, which helps to contribute to that rule of X number and also generating free cash flow margins. The interesting correlation here is that when we introduced rule of X is that rule of X is highly correlated to public company valuations, right? So as rule of X, what we typically see is as rule of X increases, valuations increase. As it decreases, valuations decrease. And we can see that. So in the middle of 2022, the average ARR multiple for a public SaaS company was about 11 times ARR. That's down to about 8.6 times ARR in Q2 this year based on the companies that we track, right? So we've seen about a 22% reduction in valuations and about a 38% reduction in the rule of X, right? So when we look at the medians, we can see that in Q2 of 22, the median was about 95. That's down to now just 59, 24 months later. So as growth rates pick up, we'll see this metric improve. But for now, we've still got a number of companies that are performing quite well, and then others that are really struggling to grow ARR are performing a lot worse on this metric. So last week we introduced this concept of AI agents, right? So both Salesforce and HubSpot unveiled their plans around helping their customers to get access to agents to help them to perform tasks and activities inside their companies. Now, one of the most prominent use cases for AI agents that we've seen introduced so far has been this concept of like an AI SDR, right? So most of you watching this will be familiar with what an SDR does. They're tasked with basically going outbound to companies that look like a good fit with the idea of generating some interest or booking a sales meeting with that prospective company. Now, the idea behind these AI SDRs is that rather than having an entry-level employee do this work, we can train an AI agent to go and do it for us, right? So this AI agent can go and find the companies, research whether or not they're a good fit, find the people within those businesses, and then personalize or create outreach messaging that can be delivered over email primarily. Some of them do it through, I think, LinkedIn as well, that allows you to generate enough interest from that prospect that they're willing to meet or request more information or whatever it might be. Now, there's been a lot of traction here, right? So I saw this quote in a TechCrunch article from Shardul Shah. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, Shardul. Shardul's a partner at Index Ventures. He said that they're seeing up to 10 companies all in this AI SDR space all have really strong traction at the same time, right? So this tells us there's a really big pull from the market towards this technology, right? Companies want this technology so that they can execute this outreach and generate sales opportunities. Now, why would this kind of an approach be appealing? I think there's a few reasons for this, right? Number one, it's about an order of magnitude cheaper to employ an AI SDR than it is an SDR in-house, right? Let's say that all in costs, you're paying an SDR, even an entry-level one, let's call it $6,000 a month fully baked, right? For about $600 a month, you could get access to one of these AI SDRs. And so by being an order of magnitude cheaper, right, it just makes it so much easier for these companies to say, sure, let's give it a shot. Let's see if it can generate some pipeline, right? Now, this is particularly appealing, I think, for companies with lower budgets, right? Think startups, think much earlier stage companies, think smaller companies that don't have the ability to hire sales teams. Think companies where the margin profile doesn't justify an outbound rep, but if you're paying, $600 instead of $6,000, then potentially it could work, right? There's all of this demand from kind of like the low end of the market that sees this as a way to set up an outbound function and get outbound performant without kind of the traditional overhead and ongoing cost that requires. The second reason why this might be compelling is, as we've seen over the last few weeks, right, go-to-market efficiency for most companies is dropping. They're having to spend more money on sales and marketing in order to generate net new ARR. And if we can replace a really costly element within our business, which is the outbound SDR function, if we can replace that with something that's 1/10 the price and it performs just as well, then we'd be silly not to, right? And so you might be seeing some of this demand come from companies testing, with existing SDR teams to go, can we generate some efficiency here? Is there something to be gained through these new tools? And then I think the third reason is that there's kind of this what I'd term the Ozempic effect, which is that it's just an easy button, right? You don't have to work hard to lose the weight. You just take Ozempic, right? Instead of having to figure out how to run outbound, you just push the AI SDR button and it generates sales opportunities for you. So I think there's probably a little bit of that going on as well. It's just hey, it's $600 a month. Let's just test it and see what happens. Now, all of this is taking place in an environment where we've seen decreasing effectiveness from outbound over the last few years, right? So I wrote an article a couple of years ago, which was based on data created by the Bridge Group. So the Bridge Group, they run this kind of biannual survey of SDR organizations to figure out, all of the key metrics around how outbound's working. And I looked at their reports from 2012 up to 2022. I think I wrote this article in 2023, right? And what we saw was that across 3 of the core metrics for outbound effectiveness, we'd seen massive decreases in efficiency. So the first one, right, was decline in connect rates every year. So the number of quality conversations that an SDR was able to generate has decreased steadily year over year. So from 2012, this was about 9 quality conversations per day, down to about 4 quality conversations per day in 2022. We saw the number of activities per day double. So in 2012, an SDR was executing an average of 55 activities a day. In 2022, that had jumped to 110, right? And then the number of activities required per conversation also increased, right? So it went from about 9 up to about 27, so a 3 times increase. And so what that tells us, right, is that we've got SDRs doing more activity and more outreach to generate fewer conversations with prospects, right? Which means that the efficiency has fallen off a cliff. I think one of the reasons that this has happened is that we've kind of got this negative feedback loop that's taking place in outbound, right? Which is that there's a decreasing number of conversations taking place. And so the response to that by most organizations is to increase activity. Right? The problem with just increasing activity levels is that typically you get a corresponding decrease in the quality of that activity, right? And so this cycle just continues, right? Decreasing quality of activity means that we're having fewer conversions, which means we need to do more activity, which means the quality decreases further, which means we do more activity, right? And you kind of get into this negative feedback loop. So we've got this negative feedback loop, and the response to that from the technology vendors and from the market was to create things like parallel dialers, right? So now instead of calling one person, we call 10 people at a time, right? And setting up multiple inboxes and domains, right? So now instead of sending, 400 emails a month, we're sending 40,000 emails a month, right? You get the picture. It's just let's just continue to increase the volume. If the conversion rates diminish, it doesn't matter. We'll just continue to increase the volume even further. Now, the reason for that is that there's this prisoner's dilemma in outbound, right? So a prisoner's dilemma is a situation in which if all parties cooperate, they get the best outcome. But if one party defects from the cooperation, right, they receive a better outcome than everybody else, right? So to put this simply, if everyone decided that they would only conduct outreach to the companies that were a perfect fit for their solution today, and would only conduct that outreach in a way that was highly personalized and highly relevant, outbound would perform much better for every organization, right? Yes, it would be slower, so you'd only be able to reach out to a fraction of the companies and accounts that you reach out to today, But conversion rates across the board would be higher. Sales efficiency or go-to-market efficiency would be better, right? Because the noise that the prospect receives is much lower. And so they're much more likely to pay attention to messages that are coming inbound because they know they're going to be more relevant. Okay, so let's like paint that as the utopia, right? It's like everyone conducts outbound in that way. Now, let's say we have that going on, and then off to the side here, there's this one party who goes, you know what, screw that. I'm just going to go like full noise. I'm going to have 100 SDRs. They're all going to be using parallel dialers. We're going to have multiple domains. We're going to be sending, 500,000 emails a month. In that world, right, that company is going to win, right? Just because they're going to get more at-bats. They're competing in an environment which is less saturated, which means the messaging is going to get through. Even though it's lower quality, it's going to get through. And so in this prisoner's dilemma scenario, what's happening is that everyone wants to be that outlier, right? Everyone wants to be that one company who gets the best results by kind of like cheating the system. And as a result, everyone gets really bad results, right? Because the market's saturated, prospects' inboxes are just hammered, their phones are ringing too often, LinkedIn inboxes are noisy, and even the best messaging, it's really hard to get cut through. The promise of this technology is that we can get the quality back into the equation, right? These AI SDRs are going to conduct amazing research on each company and each contact, and then use that research to write highly personalized and relevant messaging, right? So we get the holy grail, which is like highly personalized, highly relevant messaging at scale to your target market, right? At 1/10 the price, right? So you can see how this is like really easy to sell, right? It's like, pay us 1/10 of what you're currently spending on an SDR, and we generate output that's much better at a scale that you currently can't execute at. The challenge here is whether or not these companies can actually deliver on this, right? I think long term, it's likely that they can. But one of the risks that I see at the moment is that if all of these companies are built off the same underlying LLMs, and they're all working off the same data sets, which is this, publicly available information on LinkedIn, or the information that, ZoomInfo has access to, or whatever it might be, then all of the personalization is going to be the same. It's going to reference the same thing when it's prospecting me, right, for all of the companies that are using it, if that makes sense, right? So I'm going to start to recognize this AI messaging really quickly because it's going to refer to the same things consistently, right? Because these AI models have learned that this one specific thing about me, which they reference every time they reach out to me, right? And so I think you run into this problem where, yeah, it's differentiated. You kind of get a first mover's advantage, right? Where it's like novel and unique for, 3 to 6 months. And then as the technology becomes ubiquitous across the market, again, prospects just like start to tune this stuff out. So the real challenge will be, finding an AI SDR company that can deeply understand or program into the agent specifically how the company it's working for applies to the company that it's reaching out to. And this is where you really need that like understanding of business acumen, understanding of the market, understanding of the unique challenges within it. And it remains to be seen whether or not a solution that's designed, horizontally to work across every industry and every sector is going to be able to generate messaging that's specific enough to really resonate, right, in a way that like makes a difference today. So jury's still out. We'll be following this with interest, but yeah, I think the initial hype may wear off over the next couple of months, and we will see how this all shakes out over the next 6 to 12. Like, this is a space that's changing rapidly, and so in the next 6 to 12 months, my prediction might change, but yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on it. It's something that's obviously close to what we do every day. Right, finally today is just a shout out to the team at Ideally on closing another funding round. So they raised $5.5 million. Funding round was led by Icehouse and IF Ventures. So Ideally's reportedly passed the $1 million in ARR mark, less than 12 months after launching. So they apparently got 115 customers at this point. And they share some interesting history. So Ideally was spun out of TRA, which is an insights agency based in Auckland. TRA also incubated another really fast-growing SaaS startup here in New Zealand called Tracksuit. So 2 interesting SaaS products, both kind of in the branding and marketing or insights space, and both performing really well. TRA also incubated Zavvy early on. I think this was the first company that incubated. That company hasn't gained as much traction to date, but Tracksuit and Ideally are both rocket ships at this point, looking from the outside in. So yeah, congrats to the team. Well done. Hopefully more exciting things to come over the next 12 to 18 months. All right, that's it for episode 6. Thanks for tuning in. Again, if you have any feedback, let me know. I want to make this as interesting, entertaining for you as possible. So yeah, drop it in the comments, shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Let me know what you want me to cover. Until then, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.